Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Integrated Care Podcast from the Collaborative Family Healthcare Association. I am the production editor, Grace Pratt, and I'm joined by all of my co hosts today. I'm so excited. Gang's all here, and we have a great topic. Listen, I know that I say this every month, but I really thought we'd already done this one. And I went back through all the history and I can't find it. So if you start to get deja vu, let me know. But I swear, I'm pretty sure I can't believe it. But this is the first time we're talking about this topic. And as usual, it was prompted by recent experience I had in my clinical work. So I'm very excited to be joined by everyone. But I do have an icebreaker question as we're doing our introductions. On the day that we're recording, which is August 24th, it'll be a bit till it comes out. But today is the first day of the pumpkin spice latte for 2023. I don't know if any of you are PSL people. I'm
Yeah.
personally not, but I do drink a lot of Starbucks, like an embarrassingly lot of Starbucks. So I'm curious, though, to hear from you because it is literally the high today in Oklahoma is 106 degrees. And it is so far from fall and autumn and all of those vibes here. It's not cozy. It's the opposite of cozy. Thinking about being cozy just like makes me sweat. So anyway, I'm curious to hear what for you is that moment where it feels like autumn is here. Like what's that spark? Is it the first PSL latte, even if it's 106 degrees? Or like what is it for you? So we're going to go around the circle here from my point of view. And next we have Jen Thomas.
All right. Yay, get to go first. So, hi guys. I'm Jen Thomas, family medicine. I do a little addiction medicine work and IBH director at Morris Hospital in Morris, Illinois, Northern Illinois. So, what comes to mind to kick off fall? That's a great question. So I'd probably say in my neck of the woods, the neighborhood where I live is a bike ride distance from a fabulous pumpkin farm. I'll put a plug in for Dollinger Pumpkin Farm. Mrs. Dollinger's on our hospital board. She's fabulous. She hires all the teenagers to do the little fall pumpkin-y stuff in the fall. So my kids and I always joke that we know it's Civil War days in October when we can hear the cannon fire because they do this great battle reenactment. And we live pretty close by, so you hear the boom. And I mean, they go all in. Like I had a patient that participated, and he was a Union soldier and had this whole like theatrical thing. There were horses. It's pretty impressive. I think they still do. I don't know if COVID put a kink in that, but that definitely feels like fall when the Dollinger Pumpkin Farm is in full swing. Go get your kettle corn and cider and all that great stuff. So.
What a great community event. I felt pretty confident that you're going to be the only person on our team who says that the cannon fire is the kickoff to fall.
I hope so, because that'd be kind of weird if there was somebody else that felt that way about cannons. So
I love it. Next around, we have Bridget Beachy.
Bridget, clinical psychologist by trade, doing PCBH work and FQHC. As far as I think it's the crisp mornings, the crisp air in the morning. So it's been really hot in Washington as well. And there's still this crispness of the air in the morning and at night that exists. And it only comes in a certain way right before the fall. And so and then the other thing that's interesting, this might be along the lines of the cannonball of the smoke in the air. So normally in August August into September is when a lot of the forest fires are. So there's like this faint smell of forest fire with a little bit of crispness in the air. And you're like, fall is here.
That sounds like a candle. That's like a candle, Bridget.
not
Yeah.
gunpowder.
Like a little bit of fall, fire, crisp.
Yeah,
I
it's
think I
like,
smelled that at Bed Baths, not Bed Baths, Beyond the, what's that candle?
Bath and Body Works.
One.
Woo! Yeah.
yeah, it's a very distinct smell. And it's funny about those associations with those memories because growing up in Ohio and Pennsylvania, we didn't have forest fires. And so it doesn't even, but now, like the minute I smell the fires, I'm like, oh, fall's coming. Like it's, even though it's
I love
miserable.
those sensory. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely miserable. And I have positive associations with it because I'm like, fall's on its
There you go. That's exactly what I was asking. Next, we have Neftali Serrano.
Hey everybody, Neftali Serrano. If you can roll your R's, I'm the CEO here at the Collaborative Family Healthcare Association. Really happy to be with the team here today. And then fall. So Um, you know, my birthday is on September 15th, and right around that time, um, I start experiencing seasonal allergies. And I also start to notice the light because I suffer from some seasonal stuff. So, and I figured this out years ago. So that's the day when I start my light therapy. I pull it out of the attic and I put it on my desk, essentially. And that's sad. That's fall. That's like, okay, fall's here,
Yeah.
even though here in North Carolina, it does not feel like fall on September 15th. It feels usually like some form of oppressive heat that, should not exist in my mind, being a northerner, but it's still here. So yeah, I have to wait. Usually we have to wait another month and a half or so for that feeling that you get, Bridget, where you feel the Christmas in the air because even by Halloween, we're usually sweating in our costumes.
That's the tricky thing about living at this latitude. Even Halloween, it can be hot or it
Yeah.
can be freezing and nobody knows.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, we for sure have to wait a little bit longer than our northern neighbors here. We also have with us Monica Harrison.
The northern neighbor that is oftentimes
Yeah.
no for Halloween. Monica Harrison, licensed clinical social worker, um, work with the Ames Center out of the University of Washington, and I am in the north, in Connecticut, where I was in the South. It was about going to pumpkin patches, and that was kind of what brought in the fall. Here we are going apple picking, which was very new. And I was like, I don't know why anybody wants to do this, but you go and you like pick the
Monica,
apples, not the ones on the ground. And
Monica, it's a white people thing, Monica. I can guarantee you. When
listen,
It is.
my wife took me
I'm
apple
out
picking, I
here.
did the same thing. I was like, "Look, why are we going to pick the apples? We have people who can pick them for us and put
If
them
you just
in the
go buy
supermarket."
it. Like, let me just go buy a barrel of them. But yeah, so we go apple picking. I just go for like the fun nuance of it, get a little apple cider in.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm out there with the
Nice.
white people picking
Yeah.
apples. But that's the first for me that it's fall when you start to see all the advertisements for the different apple picking and all
Yep.
of that kind of stuff. Fall is actually my favorite because I love all the fall colors. So this is getting ready to be my favorite season. So yeah.
Nice. Good. Do you do anything with the apples? Or are you somebody who likes to like
Girl, am I
they
doing
just
that?
sit there sadly and look at you and
It's for
hope
the
they get baked?
experience. It's not to really go home and take the apples and bake any. I mean, I do love bacon, but I'm not doing all that.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
for like go home and bake it with the apples and here I come
Yeah.
with apple pie because apple pie is not my favorite pie. Can you believe that? So
No. What's your
yeah, no,
favorite?
we
Are
don't
you
do
a
none of those.
pecan? I like a good
Listen,
mocha pecan.
listen, don't you put no mocha in it, Jen. Wow.
What? Oh, come on.
Down. No, Jen. So I am originally from New Orleans. Although
Okay.
you cannot
Okay.
hear that
Fair.
accent. Pecan pie is where it's
Straight
at.
up Caro syrup. No cocoa powder, just the
No,
Caro syrup. All
just
right.
get
All
into
right.
it straight.
That's fine.
Clearly,
Back to
we
business.
It's
need
like
to
I
have
don't want to watch this.
clearly we need to have a pie debate for our November icebreaker. Although that might just take the whole episode. I don't
Yeah.
know. There's some
It'd
strong
be
feelings.
brutal.
Uh, Thank you, Monica. And like I said, I'm Grace Pratt. I am the behavioral medicine faculty at Integra's Great Plains Family Medicine Residency in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, which is why it's still 106 degrees today. For me, I think being in like Big 12 country, it's college football. When I can turn on game day in the morning in the background, and especially, and sometimes this is like late September, early October, when I can open the windows, let a little cool air in, and hear just the commentator. I'm not even really listening that closely, but hear the commentators rumbling about college football and making the picks, and like that feels like fall to me. So I am ready for those days to be here. Of course, my children are like, "Are we still watching football? Why are we watching football?" I'm like, "I don't know. Go play. We have two TVs. Pick something else." Um, so that feels like it for me. Well, I'm so excited that we are all here. We have a great show topic today. We have talked about some big picture things a few months ago, and we have some big picture things coming up as well. But we're going to do another very clinical topic today. And in some ways, it's going to be an extension from last month when we talked about trauma. Spoiler alert, that's going to be coming up. But again, it also comes out of a recent clinical experience I have. But before we get to that, Neftali, are there news and notes?
There are, yes. So, one is just a plug for our integrated care news site. And I was just on there earlier today, just perusing, and I'm just so proud of all the work that CFHA members do around so many different areas: family oriented care, pediatrics, PCBH work. You've got Dave and Bridget's videos on there with all sorts of clinical nuggets. And it's just check it out. Go to integratedcarenews.com. Check out the great work that passionate people are doing all across the country in all sorts of different areas to transform healthcare, make it more sane. And the reason I was poking around was because I was just seeing if a recent community conversation we had this week was uploaded yet. It's on YouTube, but it hasn't ported over to the site yet. So probably by the time you're listening to it, it'll be on there. But we had a community conversation on mid to late career sort of developmental needs. And it was just such a rich conversation. Jen, I know you were on there in that conversation as well. And if even if you're not in the mid to late career, it'd be really, I wish I could have heard people at that stage talk about
Yeah.
what that feels like, what the different needs are, how to kind of think about it, be intentional around it. It was just a great conversation. So check it out. It'll be on the Integrated Care News site under the videos tab here soon. The other news and note is simply that we have our annual conference in Phoenix, Arizona, obviously. For those of you out there who are already planning on going, get your hotel rooms because we are running out of hotel room space. So make sure you get those locked in. It's going to be at the Marriott in downtown Phoenix. Really great location. By October, it should be nicer there in Phoenix. Should be a nice, less 3-digit type temperature experience. And we've just got a great setup. So go to integratedcareconference.com for more information on that. So those are our news and notes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Neftali. So I want to set the stage for our conversation today by presenting a case. I'm going to change some details to protect the privacy of the patient, of course. But I think it's going to sound familiar whether you saw this patient or not. So I am working in a residency training clinic, working in primary care behavioral health, but they also have hospital patients and outpatient clinic patients. And the hospital service team came to me and they said, "Hey, we have a patient. We're wondering if you can help us. We're not really sure how much longer she's going to be in the hospital. She came in, all of her testing is normal. She keeps having these times where she has sort of what looks like seizures, but then also like everything's normal. There's no brain activity that matches seizures. All the tests are normal, and we just can't figure out like what might be going on or how we might be able to help her." And of course, there's a bigger picture. There's other comorbidities. There's other thing going on in her diagnosis, like in her problem list. She's young. She's like generally kind of healthy, but kind of not healthy. Like there's a long list of problems, but also she's kind of generally well appearing. And then another case about 2 weeks ago, patient is a kid, is 10, is having vomiting at school and missing so much school, and he throws up all the time, and mom is super concerned about this little boy and why he's missing so much school and why he's always sick. And we're like, well, school's just started. There's a lot of bugs going around, but it turns out this was a pattern last year. And then he was miraculously better over the whole summer. But now he's back to school. Now he's back to vomiting. And we can extend out, lots of other similar cases, and I'm sure you can. And a lot of times what we come down to is our medical providers on our team, our nurses, our doctors, our consultants, do all the testing, rule everything out. And then they're like, well, now I don't know, maybe you can help them. Sometimes they keep a great attitude and a ton of compassion towards this patient. Other times they come to you with a bit of a roll of their eyes, like, this person is such a somaticizer, as the word gets thrown around. So, this is the topic I'm shocked we haven't talked about. Somatic symptoms, somatic presentations, this like really cloudy, nebulous mind, body, physical reaction. And so, I wanted to spend some time today talking about it. And also, why the conclusion that we're going to come to is that we are especially adept to support these patients in integrated care. But before we get to that conclusion, what are some of the things that come to mind? What have been some of your experiences with working with patients that have these either medically unexplained symptoms, or sometimes it's functional symptoms or somatic symptoms? There's a lot of language that gets thrown around when we're talking about this.
Everyone already knows what I'm going to say. So I'll let somebody else go.
Go, Bridget, give it to us.
Just start us off.
Trick pony up in here. You know it's going to be a contextual interview. You know you're going to find out about the love work play. You know you're going to find out about the function of the behavior. And you know you're going to realize that the brain processes emotional and physical pain in the same area. So if I'm armed with those three things as a clinician, most of the time send me in, coach, and we're going to get something done. I'm not saying it's always cured. I'm not saying that we're always able to necessarily help the patient know that there's a link, but I'm going to be able to do it in a way that's very respectful and very non-accusatory, not blamey, and armed with those three things: the contextual interview, recognizing that there's always a function to a behavior, and behavior you can expand out to like thoughts, emotions, experiences, and then that the brain processes emotional and physical pain in the same area. So those are the kind of like toolkit that I need as a clinician when I go.
Mm, that's great. I like that brain processes, what is it? Emotion and pain in the same, but that's a great nugget for your medical providers. I don't think we ever get taught that, of like how to explain that in a way that's validating and not, well, it's just in your head. But that's cool. I think we could really use some more coaching on approaching somatization in that way. That's great. I'm going to steal that.
I think that hits on something so important, Jen, is like, how do we explain this or language this to patients in an acceptable way? And one of the things that's great about that approach that Bridget's talking about is it it doesn't matter if we find a test result that proves what's happening. It doesn't matter if we find a perfect explanation for a biological pathway, because we know that it's both and, right? Like our mind and our body are connected. And I feel like a lot of times when I see patients who their doctor is categorizing them in this way, the patient is so sure that there's a physical cause to what's going on. If they could just find that one physical cause, then it could be treated and it could be over. But what we know and what we can help shift a lot of times is that perspective, because even when we do have a very clear pathology or physiology of what's going on, treat, treating health is not that simple. Like our diabetic patients, we know exactly why they're diabetic, but that doesn't mean that it's just a easy fix to cure what's going on with them. And so to not have to have the why necessarily, but to focus on the how and the difference that it's making can really shift that perspective and help with the language a lot. Because in our efforts to explain to patients what's going on or to explain why we're not doing certain things, I do think a lot of times we accidentally communicate to them, no, this is a you problem and we can't help you with that.
Having
Yeah,
those
I
so
think
nuggets.
that's Oh, look,
Oh,
we
you
were
go.
all getting in there. We were all
Oh,
getting in there then.
you go.
you're up,
No, I
Monica.
was just gonna say that's where you hear the kinda it's all in your head, and I don't wanna negate kinda, society's fix it culture, that we have, that plays a very big part in that too. Um, that then also when you do come in and you try to explain like, "Welcome, you're living, you mean your mind and your body are connected? Like, what? Welcome." You're living. It's hard for individuals to understand how they're feeling emotionally is bringing out or exacerbating or creating like these physical things that are happening for them, because we are very much in a fix it. I have this problem. Give me the medicine. Fix it. Like I just fix it, without some of the opportunity to be in contextual interview. Let's talk about some of these other things that are happening in your life and how they're impacted, how you're impacted, and all of those pieces. So I don't want to just because I don't want to negate that we very much are in a fix it, pleasure now. Um, am I saying the right pleasure now? Or, like you get your needs met right away. And that is continuing. That hasn't like drawn back any over the years. I've actually seen it kind of rev up more. So that piece is challenging too.
Yeah, I think I had a recent experience. Actually, my grandfather passed last week. My last living grandfather, and my mother cared for him for uh, the last couple of years of his life. And it was interesting because I saw in her grief reaction, um, which we know grief, it's a zigzaggy thing, right? It's a very difficult thing to navigate. One of the things that I saw come out in her grief reaction, I think, touches on what we're talking around here are the expectations of medical professionals and of healthcare in general. And so she got pretty upset at some things, and some of it may have been founded, but some of it was based on she got upset with the medical team um, because basically my grandfather decompensated very quickly. She expected the medical team to know exactly what was going on and how it was happening. And I think part of that is because there is, and this is to your point, Monica, that culturally we have expectations around what healthcare can and should do for us. So, unconsciously, patients come in with these expectations. I have something wrong. If I go to a doctor, they will figure this out. They have the knowledge to figure this out. And with these medically unexplained symptoms, much like things as complex as the death process, which is not 100% understood, there's lots of different things in ways that we die, not all of which are very pleasant. Um, we really don't know. We don't have that fundamental knowledge. And so what I try to do um, is remind myself when I'm with a patient, and I try to cue the physician that I'm working with as well around this and say, hey, I really don't know. Like that even that idea of like it's in your head, how do I know that? Right? How do I know it's not some other process that's going on that we just haven't been able to detail or find, right? So you have to go in there with a sense of humility and then help coach the patient towards that humility because ultimately what you're working towards with somatization typically is acceptance of some sort, right? It's accept first before you jump to fix, right? And when you do that, then after that, I think once you start from a place of acceptance and curiosity, then you can start to think about ways to make life better, even with some of the symptoms you might be experiencing that are unexplained and have a poorly understood etiology. But I think even those of us who get called in by you, Jen, and
Mhm.
into the room to
Mhm.
work with the patient, we often do come in with that expectation that we're supposed to know.
Right.
We're supposed to figure it out. And so when we say, oh, well, the doctor said it's not the physical thing, consciously or unconsciously, a lot of us go into the room thinking, well, I know what it is. It's in your head. In other words, we know it's a psychological uh, dysfunction or a process. Whereas, like, I coach my business, no, you don't know.
Mhm.
That's the point. We don't
Mhm.
know. And so pretending that just because it's not this doesn't mean it is this. That's
Mhm.
just poor logic, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's
No,
this
I go
go
ahead,
ahead,
Grace.
Jen.
No, I was just gonna say that unlearning is what I'm hearing from that. I have to unlearn that impulse of go in there and get the right answer and get the right pill. I feel like that's so ingrained in you and, allopathic medical school training. That's the cause effect, question answer. And I love that the humility of we don't know everything. Oh, that's so true. And it takes the pressure off you, right? You don't have to like feel like you failed if you're like, well, I'm not sure what's going on. But maybe if we bring in some other team members, we can see, how else we can help minimize some of that symptoms and that suffering to help you get more functional. That's great.
It's the
It
fallacy.
is.
It affects us as well, right? On the behavioral
Yep.
side.
That's what I was gonna say. We have the same
'Cause
thing.
yeah, because
We have to go in there
the
and come in with a
fallacy
diagnosis.
yep, exactly. The fallacy is that everything that is known to man exists in the DSM. And
Yeah.
I'm like, "That's ridiculous."
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
Because
Not at all.
we don't know. One thing that working in medical education has taught me for the last almost 10 years is because I did it. I'd never really been around doctors, around medicine all that much, except as a patient until I started working as in integrated care. I guess more than 10 years now. Oh, Lord. But I was like, you guys really don't know? You mean you're still learning so much? And it has challenged my assumptions as a person who exists in the world and understanding science and medicine. And just to even see the change in growth and development rapidly in the last 9 years of my job, but I guess more like 15 years working in healthcare, it blows my mind. It continues to blow my mind, and I think I love that what you named as humility, Neftali, that we need to say that we don't know, and also to recognize that it's hard. We want to have an answer. Our patient is coming to us asking for an answer, and so there's a lot of tension in there and a lot of discomfort. They're coming to us for help. We are helpers, and we don't have the answer, but that doesn't mean that we don't have help. And I think that's a really important shift for us to make is that we can help without an answer. Oh my gosh, Monica, just put in the chat. It becomes about us. Yeah, we're making it about us. And we have to be able to sit with the discomfort of not knowing. We have to be able to sit with our patients' expressions of grief, of having these symptoms without an answer, because there is grief about that. There's anger about that. There's a lot of times denial about that. But that doesn't mean that we can fix it by conjuring some kind of answer out of nowhere that doesn't exist. So it looks different. I think our goals really shift and our goals with patients really shift. I'm curious about if you guys have certain ways that you talk about this or certain ways that you do language it to patients, because I have a few that come to forefront of mind for me. I'm going to list out before I forget them. One of them is to talk about stress or life circumstances exacerbating symptoms or making problems worse because I feel like that's a lot more acceptable to patients. Usually they can accept, okay, my stress is making this thing worse. I still don't have an answer, but I really believe that there's a core physical like answer that we could find. We don't know it, but my stress is making it worse. Can help give a little bit of a pivot to the argument of why maybe we need to address some stress. Another one is a truism from a favorite colleague of mine that when he's explaining to patients about like physical manifestations of emotional difficulties or stress, he talks about the fact that like, of course, our bodies and our minds are linked. Like if he came over and he'll use someone in the room. He'll either use the patient or use like a colleague if there's someone there. And he says, if I came over and whispered your deepest, darkest secret into your ear that you didn't know I knew, your face would turn so red. You would be flushed. Your heart rate would go up. Like just the thought, you would get panicky. And those are physical reactions. Did anything change in your body? Did anyone touch you? No. But it's your mind does have an influence over your body. And so just really normalizing that to people can make a big difference. What are some of the things for you guys that you use, either language you use with patients or how you explain this, that's been helpful?
I
I
guess
would say I want to.
go ahead, Bridget.
Oh,
You go.
no, no, you go, Jen. I want to hear it.
No, no, no. I was about to just quote somebody else. I don't know any original. No, so I have to put a plug in for a great resource, Primary Care Psychiatry. I don't know if y'all can see this. Sean Hersevort. This is a handbook that I literally have on my desk in practice every day. And when you said, Grace, that somatization was the topic, I flipped to that page and was like, oh, I got to read up. I do that all the time. There's a great little acronym in here, CARE-MD, CBT, Assess Medical, regular visits, empathy, med psych interface, and do no harm. So it's talking about like thorough investigation before you give a diagnosis, regular visits, ask about stressors, empathy, med psych interface, so educate about the mind body interaction and avoid unneeded tests and treatments. So that's just a little nugget that I love. I don't know if anybody likes this text, but I recommend it to all my, I don't know if you can see it in the camera. All my colleagues. It's just a great little like evidence-based little, okay, what should we do? And here's some guideposts that can bake right into integrated care. So I don't know. Again, I'm just stealing somebody else's thunder on what helps, but
No, I love that, and we will
yeah,
share that resource in the show
cool,
notes for sure. Before I
great.
forget, I wanna say that whole regular visit feels opposite a lot of times to what we want to do, because a lot of
Yep,
times these are the patients, again, if it comes about us,
yep,
we feel uncomfortable, we don't have an
yep.
answer, we don't know how to fix it, so
They
we
take
see them on our
time,
schedule and we're like,
right?
"Ah,
Like,
yeah, this person's gonna take time,"
yep,
and so we're like, "Okay, I'll see you in 6 months." But, like,
yeah.
we need to be seeing them in 6 weeks, not 6 months or 1 month, or we need to be seeing them regularly to get ahead of what's going
Yep.
on.
Yep. And I think that's great where you guys, as an integrated care team member, can help educate the PCP on like, no, this helps you. Like the avoidance strategy with this difficult patient, of, I don't want to see you. Maybe we can go 6 months is going to hurt you in the long run. That if you see them more often, you might actually find you get somewhere with them and you're less frustrated. And that's a bit of a like, that can be an uphill battle or a conversation with your primary care teammates to be like, what? That's the opposite of what I'm feeling. I want to avoid. I don't want to like go in there and lean in further. But having you guys say, hey, this is how that could help. Oh, that's so great. That's eye opening.
Yeah, there's just one real quick nuance that I would add to what you said, Grace, which is when I'm doing the mind body connection thing, I'm always couching it in terms of humility and an experimental approach because I don't know that stress is causing their symptoms. Right? And I think that's one way that I use to validate the patient experience and say, look, here the reality is that we in healthcare are good at a lot of things, but we're mostly good at treating the things that we know. But there's a whole category of things that relates to the way the body works that we don't know. And it looks like what you're experiencing falls in this category, frustratingly so. So we can't assume that we know what's going on, but we can try some things out. We can try different ways to kind of work with what you're experiencing. So one of the ways that we know the body reacts is under stress, this stuff happened. Then I go into what you talked about because it loosens the patient from um, what is a fundamental presenting issue with a lot of folks who have strong somatization, especially if it is of a psychological etiology. Again, I don't know, but if it is, rigidity is a big piece of that picture. So if you just introduce more rigidity, right, you just give another category for them to kind of face. They'll either do one of two things. One is they will reject it, and then you get a lot of defensiveness in the room. No, it's not in my head. I'm not stressed out. This is not about stress. This is about XYZ, whatever reason they've picked already in their story. Or they will replace that story with the story you gave them, which becomes no better, right? Because they're still just stuck in psychological rigidity. So having that little bit of that dose of humility and experimental approach and saying, let's try some things based on a hypothesis. When we do hypotheses, we have to be open to what different things are. And we have to be open to the idea that we might never know.
It's
Well,
the idea of the might never know that I think is sometimes challenging for people, but I love, the way that Neftali explained that. Um, I will be honest, my approach varies depending on the patient sitting in front of me. Because when you start to do that contextual interview, you actually start to get a glimpse from the patient perspective of what they think is going on, right? Like if they think it's more medical and they're hitting it hard that way, and like they told me to come see you, but I know it isn't right. Like so, then I already know. Okay, I got to hit this another way. Versus the patient who might be like, well, I've been under a lot of stress, and so I know. Right? There's just a different way to me to approach it based on the individual sitting in front of you and where their mind has already decided it's going to go, which may or may not be wrong, right? Like again, because we don't know. But it's interesting to me, um, the more this kind of team-based mind-body connection is getting out there. So I just give a quick story plug. So I've been having problems with my Achilles. I'm like, Lord, I ain't got time to be having no surgery. Jesus knows. And so I'm in physical therapy, right? And And like he's telling me these exercises, and we're doing the exercise and all this stuff. And he's like, you know, I don't know like how much you're into research, but let me, just tell you. And so he starts telling me this research around how there's these individuals they're in physical therapy, but their symptoms got better without really getting physical therapy, but just coming and having an opportunity to talk. And he was explaining to me why they ask every patient that comes in like some random question. I think this week the question was, what's your favorite childhood cartoon or something? Or would you rather your hand be in a box or your hand stuck in a box? So they ask these random things, right? And so he's like, that's why we ask that because the research just kind of shows that patients have gotten better without us really doing our physical therapy techniques and da da da. I know it kind of sounds strange, and I'm like, "Let me just tell you what I do." It doesn't sound strange, right? But I could see like, because I was like, it's an interesting question. I'm talking it up because I can be a talker. And so I think he was like, oh, okay, so I can give her this because like she's engaging with me. So I do think like how you approach it with your patient depends on the patient in front of you. Some might need for you to come with the, oh, I could see why you think that, and maybe I just need to talk about how you're doing emotionally can exacerbate that. Versus another patient who you might just have to explain. It's kind of the which came first, the chicken or the egg. We don't really know. Like sometimes it's both. Sometimes So I think it depends on the patient in front of you and leaning into that because most of the time, patients have an idea.
I talk a lot with my learners, behavioral health and medical, about health beliefs and the perspectives that people have on their health. And usually, when I first ask, especially physicians, about health beliefs, they're like, "What do you mean? There's nothing to believe. It's science. It's either like we do medicine." And they're like, "Okay," but there's a lot of things people believe about their health and believe about their problems. And there's also a big culturally bound aspect of that. We haven't talked yet about the personal characteristics of someone and their unique kind of personal and social identity and the way that affects their explanations and their beliefs about what's going on. But that's a part of the problem, or not a problem, but just a part of the fabric of this communication as well. And someone's beliefs about whether their providers are going to listen to them, or whether physicians will and the healthcare team can have an answer, or whether they want to talk to a behavioral health person, or what that means that their doctor thinks about them. So there's this very like deep, Neftali put in the chat, the story the patient is telling, which really helps with just what you're saying, Monica. That will steer us. There's a author that writes a lot about health and culture. I think she's retired now, but Jerry Ann Galanti, I'm sure a lot of people have read her work, but she has 4 C's that she encourages people to use when they're asking people about their health. And it's, what do you call this thing? Which can be helpful because some people call it like episodes, or some people, especially if they have this ambiguous kind of medical unexplained. What do they call it? What do they think is causing it? What do they think the cure is? And what concerns them the most about it? And those are really helpful questions because a lot of times the assumptions that we go in with as the medical team don't match with the patient's experience, just like along those lines of the contextual interview is going to tell us so much. But asking more specifically about this ambiguous health problem that they're having can also help us a ton. And it can give us a language to understand because we tend to assume that people think like we think. And unfortunately, that's definitely a terrible assumption, because people think all kinds of different ways. And there's a lot of data that says, if you make pinpoint your intersectional identity and make a list of, your gender and your race and your cultural background and, all of those different pieces that contribute to your intersectional identity, the more different points someone has, the more divergent their intersectional identity is from yours, the less you understand them. And yet we still continue to assume that people think like we think. And so then when they do something that's not what we would do, we start to blame them. We start to make all of these little really negative attributions and assumptions and stereotypes about why that's happening. And then it furthers this schism of, my team doesn't care about me, doesn't listen to me, doesn't have my best interest in mind. And so when there's no trust and we're telling them, we're trying to be humble maybe and saying like, hey, we don't know, medicine doesn't know. Let's focus on the function of this. Let's focus on what you can improve. If there's no trust there, that's going to come out like, you think this is all in my head and you don't want to help me. And maybe that's based in like some very real interactions they've had with someone in the past. Or maybe it's something that we can adapt and change, which we need to be the ones that adapt and change as the people in the positions of power in the healthcare system. But all of that is relevant too. So I love those 4 C's. I think that's really helpful. And it's more about, what is the story of what's going on?
So powerful what you're saying. Love those 4 C's. I'm going to steal that. Had not heard that. Um, just to kind of add to that nuance, part of what we have to understand is that uh, we are culturally conditioned beings. So to your point of the intersectionality of our different identities, right? So for Hispanic patients, for example, oftentimes when they are experiencing a particular stress response, it can look very much like a stroke. So they will talk about, one-sided numbness, tingling, arm going dead, or some weird sensation. They'll talk about something going down their head, going down their neck, going down to their back. They'll talk about chest pain and chest pressure. Um, and you know that's a reaction, right? Now you could say, "Oh, well, just Hispanic patients are like, they just overreact." I've heard some people say they just overreact to things, like they're just so expressive, right? That they just and sort of kind of pathologize that as if that's not the right kind of response to have. What you don't realize is we are culturally conditioned animals. So it just is that in different cultures, your baseline neurology is trained in a different way. So if you grow up as a Latino, yes, and you experience stress, you're going to actually physiologically feel that differently neurologically than you are if you grew up in Japan or the United States, right? So the expression of what's happening, it's not just like just in your head. There's actual literal training that has happened physiologically for how different uh, experiences are expressed, both in terms of psychological phenomenon and physical phenomenon. And that is why it's important to have that cultural humility going into an encounter with the patient, because you do not, as you're saying, very well, Grace, you don't know. And if you don't know, you tend to assume. When you assume that other people think and act and should react like you do, that's when you get into big problems.
Well, I'm gonna take this stretch, and some people might. I don't see it as a stretch, but I'm gonna say for some people it might be a stretch. In one point in time in the history of healthcare, the thought process was that African Americans had tougher skin and could handle pain better. And so there are all these, you could see it, it's documented, all of these experiments and testing and all of these things that were done on African Americans without measures for comfort. Say it that way to be politically correct, without measures for comfort, because people had preconceived notions about what African American could or could not handle, right? And so to me, that sentiment is not too far fetched from the same thought process.
That makes sense. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess what we're saying, I hadn't even thought about this before, but like you have to be very careful about implicit bias when dealing with a patient who's somaticizing. Like, I've never actually made that connection until now. Yeah.
So just sit down somewhere and just do your contextual interview like you're supposed to do and be present in the moment. That's all we need you
That's
to
what I'm
do.
saying. What I'm saying.
Bridget has been so good. She's like, I'm not even gonna say anything. I'm not even gonna.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, that's what we teach our trainees and hopefully including our medical residents, is that like it's okay to not know. It's okay to say you don't know. It's okay that it could be a process. Just sit down with humility, genuinely be curious about the person's life, not curious so that you can get to the answer eventually, because that's like giving the charity to make yourself feel better. Like genuinely, you will feel better if you genuinely volunteer your time and or money to something, then you will feel better. But if you do it to feel better, then it doesn't work. Same thing here. Like if you're just being curious so that they can tell you the answer, you can get there, then like you have to, I swear to goodness, and it takes some time, I think, developmentally. I think that's taking time as a clinician. But when I walk into the room, I genuinely like, I don't have any idea what I'm going to, I have like 4 conceptualizations. I have my toolkits. I have all my knowledge base that lives in my brain, but I reserve that judgment until I talk to them. And then you pick and choose, like Monica, you were explaining how you're going to say this, how you're going to frame that. And it's a scary place to be in for novice folks. So new BHCs, new medical residents, it's like a terrifying place to be in. But if you focus your energy on understanding basic human principles, focus your energy on, these really core structures of knowledge base, and then trust the process. Yeah, but that all does take time. And for novice folks out there, if you're new, that's okay if you're freaking out right now. You will get there. It's a lifelong practice.
It does. And I find that really reassuring, honestly, because you don't have to be an expert. If someone's coming in and we don't know what's causing their problem, you don't have to be an expert on functional neurological disorder to know how to help them. You don't have to be an expert on nightmares. You don't have to be an expert on diabetes. You don't have to be an expert on any of the things. You should be an expert or work towards being an expert on humility and the cultural or the contextual interview and all of these processes that we've talked about, but the content doesn't matter so much. And I find that deeply reassuring. And what I tell my beginning supervisees all the time, and my physicians, all my residents, everybody is at its base, you are a human being and a person going down to sit down with compassion and connection and to listen to this person's story and to offer some support along the way. And that in itself, because they're always like, I can't help them. I don't have anything to help them. Like, you are the help. You are the healing. This relationship is healing. What you are going in with your humanity and your connection, that is what's needed in this moment. And I find that personally, I find that deeply comforting because that means what I need to do is cultivate my presence. I need to be calm in who I am and how I'm approaching the patient. I need to know that this is okay. We're okay. Like, I'm not going in with the burden of making everything perfect because I sure can't do that. But I can sit with someone and I can connect with them and I can hold space for their pain. And through that, I really believe that's where the healing and the change happens, no matter what we're talking about, which is great because back to what we said at the beginning, we don't really know what we're talking about with somatic problems. We don't know what's somatic. There are absolutely cases where somebody's been labeled as somatic their whole lives, and then all of a sudden they get an answer that explains everything, but we don't know. And so we have to
Yeah.
hold what we don't know.
There's entire categories of things we've made up, like fibromyalgia, for example, like even like, and now it's shifted. And this is, I think, something that would be interesting to culturally study. I don't know, Jen, in your practice or any of the other folks, but like,
Yeah.
I feel like it's shifted from fibromyalgia to, oh gosh, what's there's like, oh, it'll come to me, but it's some other similar sounding type thing that with a lot of vague symptoms.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
uh,
Lupus?
no, not lupus, but it's like with tick disease,
Oh, Lyme disease.
Lyme disease. Yeah, it's
Yeah, yes,
Lyme
that's a
disease. Yeah,
huge
yeah,
vortex of knowledge. Yeah,
yeah.
yes, came up clinically for me twice in the last week, like
Yeah,
literally
It's
Lyme disease questions.
always up here in Connecticut. As
yeah,
a
Yep,
like, they're always
yep,
talking about Lyme disease. There's a big
yeah.
yep,
push. Yeah.
yeah. And you
Mm,
attempt to be evidence-based and going up to date, and it's like, "That's vague too," and you're like, "What do I tell this person?" It's tough.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I don't want people out there to hear from our conversation, uh, uh, because I may come across as sounding very confident and like, oh, this is so easy. No, like, it's really hard. It's hard to. This is hard work. It's hard to stay in that space that you were just talking about, Grace, as a clinician. It's hard not to get into the fix it mentality, like Monica said. It's hard not to get into the avoidance, like Jen said. Um, it is very difficult. I can think of a couple of specific cases where, and again, somatization is a spectrum, right? I mean, you can go from someone who's just like temporarily somaticizing and, in very sort of low impact ways on their life to all the way where you get someone with like pseudocyesis. I can never say that word, but basically it's someone who is somaticizing out of a delusion, right? That they are pregnant. And I've had several patients that I've worked with our care teams on with that issue. And it is incredibly difficult to sit with someone who is convinced that they are pregnant and have all these somatic symptoms as a result of that: the cramping, the bloating, the fears of bleeding and saying that they're bleeding even though they're not bleeding, all this stuff that revolves around that, and then still have a very um, curious, patient-centered, contextual approach. That's when you're really challenged to be in that space and work with that. So it is not easy. So don't expect it to be easy. You have to live into the complexity that the patient is experiencing. And then I think where I try to go to is just the functional piece. I try to think, what function does this serve in this person's life? How can I stay connected with this person to help them live their best life, even potentially in spite of these somatic symptoms? Yeah. So please don't leave feeling like this is supposed to be super easy, and because it's not super easy for you, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, that
Cultivate a
functional
presence.
piece. The functional piece that Neftali said is super good. I never get into arguments whether or not it is uh, physical or mental. I take more of the approach that, well, we don't know, chicken or egg, like Monica was saying. We do know that if you're in this much pain, you're probably going to feel stressed. And we do know that stress can make pain worse. So that's fun. I normally say fun like things like that. Like, well, that's fun. Because, demonstrating the humility and say, and that being said, while it's trying to get figured out, we still want you to have a meaningful life. And once you've done the contextual interview, you know all the things that are super important to them. And say, like, I think it's amazing that you're still working. I think it's amazing that you're taking care of your kids. I think it's amazing that you're still going to bingo on Mondays with your church group or whatever, what have you, and then that's where you get so much buy-in because they're like, well, yeah. And it's like, yeah, so regardless of what this is, we know going to bingo with your church group is good. And they're like, yes. So so our time together, instead of trying to figure out what it is or what it isn't, we have all the tests happening. We're going to take that's going to be a process. What we can do in here is talk about how you can do as many of the things that you want to do as possible, given some of these symptoms. And so how can we navigate that? And then that's where we make our SMART goals around like, what are they going to do while experiencing some of these symptoms? And the visit has a completely different feel when you go that route versus getting into an argument about what it is, what it isn't. Is it the trauma? Is it this? Is it that? And most of the time they end up telling you about their trauma. It is that. And if it's not, then it's not.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if we
And
still
in
don't know,
case,
it's
yeah,
both and.
yeah.
If you're on YouTube, you can see all of us shrug. I hate to wrap us up because this has been such a fabulous conversation, but we are at the end of our time. I think there are so many nuggets in what we've talked about in a really difficult topic that I hope our listeners can take from this. Thank you all so much for just the wisdom that you've shared today and also the solidarity. So much comes from hearing like, it's not hard because you're doing it wrong. It's just hard because it's hard, but that doesn't mean there's nothing we can do. And so I hope that our listeners are leaving with that feeling too. We are going to go to a wonderful recorded ending from Deepu. Thank you, Deepu. Thank you to my co host. Thank you to our listeners. And we'll talk to you again next month.